Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. lawmg.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. As candidates ramp up for the 2020 election, officials across the state are looking for ways to make sure every vote is counted.
By allowing them to go back and having some sort of a paper trail, I think is going to make things a little more easier, and they're going to feel more secure.
The nation's largest dairy producer has filed for bankruptcy. Ahead, we look at declining sales in the industry. And farm accidents are down overall in Indiana, but small farmers who can't afford newer, safer equipment are seeing more injuries.
These farmers tend to go out and buy used equipment, and so if we look at the data, about a quarter of all of our fatalities in the state are part-time farmers.
Those stories and the latest headlines from across the state right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. In just less than a year, Hoosiers will cast their ballots for president, governor, and other down ballot races. And something that is bound to capture a lot of attention is the election system. Indiana's Secretary of State has been working on the issue, but some critics say it's not enough. Adam Pinsker reports on what's being done to protect the integrity of the election and make sure the voting system isn't vulnerable to attacks.
We'll talk about that in just a second.
On a recent fall night in Brown County, residents got a chance to test drive new voting equipment that was used for the first time in this month's municipal elections. The equipment allows people to cast electronic ballots with a verified paper trail.
By allowing them to go back and having some sort of a paper trail, I think is going to make things a little more easier, and they're going to feel more secure and more confident that their vote has been counted.
A law that went into effect in July requires all counties by the year 2030 to use voting machines that provide a paper trail audit. Several counties are already using this technology, but cybersecurity experts say waiting another decade to implement it is risky, especially after evidence of Russian interference in the 2016 election.
There was a proof of concept that was done in 2016. So now any country, any group that would like to similarly interfere has a game plan.
Chair of IU Bloomington Cybersecurity Program, Scott Shackelford, says hackers don't have to target all of Indiana's 92 counties. They could focus their efforts on a few swing counties to influence an election. Indiana's voting machines are not connected to the internet, and while that may thwart hackers, Shackelford says it doesn't guarantee voter information won't fall into the wrong hands.
If there is any way in, not only by the election officials themselves, but volunteers on that day, you can slip in a flash drive and still potentially compromise the machine.
In addition to the state's new cybersecurity law, the legislature approved $10 million in next year's budget for cybersecurity. Democratic State Senator J.D. Ford sits on the Elections Committee. He lobbied for more money, but the Republican majority denied his request.
I think with everything that's going on in our country right now, in regards to election security, I think that's a request that we could have easily have provided.
Ford is now considering his own legislation that would beef up security of the polls.
I'm looking at, what do we do when we have a security threat, whether it be an infrastructure security threat or a physical security threat inside the polling location.
He also says same-day or automatic voter registration should be allowed in Indiana. He says it would be an inexpensive fix that would streamline the voting process.
Nothing else we do in this building matters if we can't protect the election and making sure that our vote counts.
Shackelford says even though the timeline for making these security upgrades is longer than some would like, he says Indiana is moving in the right direction.
There's no such thing as a 100% secure software package. You can compromise any system with enough patience and resources. So we have to be comfortable with that. We have to do a better job at deterring those attacks.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Adam Pinsker.
We reached out to Republican Senator Greg Walker, chair of the Elections Committee, for comment on the story, but he declined our request for an interview. Well, one of the nation's largest dairy processors has filed for bankruptcy amid a decades-long drop-off in U.S. milk consumption. Tyler Lake has more.
Dean Foods supplies milk for its own brands like Dairy Pure, Meadow Gold, and True Moo, as well as a number of store brands. One big blow came last year when Walmart opened its own milk processing plant in Indiana. The plant gave some farmers new buyers for their milk, but Dean Foods blames it for increasing competition and adding surplus milk to the market. Hoosier dairy experts say it's a difficult time for the industry, and they've called on legislators to pass a trade agreement with Mexico and Canada that could open up markets for local producers.
So if we can create, more markets for this dairy, it's going to pick everybody up. And I know there's opportunities out there.
Since 1975, the amount of milk consumed per capita in the U.S. has tumbled more than 40%. More recently, health and animal welfare concerns have also contributed as more shoppers seek out non-dairy alternatives like almond milk. And all that has hit dairy farmers and milk sellers hard, leading some smaller farmers to quit the business. 2 out of every 3 dairy farmers in Indiana have closed since 1997. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Tyler Lake.
Now let's take a look at other stories making headlines this week. Hoosiers bet about $48 million on sports online last month, the first time such wagers were legally possible in Indiana. Lawmakers legalized sports wagering this year, but mobile sports gambling wasn't ready to go until October. So Hoosiers responded by betting more money online in October than in person. $44 million in bets were placed at casinos last month, and all that sports wagering produced a little more than $1 million for the state in tax revenue. That's compared to more than $37 million in revenue generated by all other gambling at Indiana casinos last month. Indiana Democratic Party Chair John Zody is seeking to replace retiring Democratic State Senator Mark Stoops of District 40. Zody, who is a 7th-generation Hoosier and 20-year Bloomington resident, says he will focus on funding public education, fighting gerrymandering, and encouraging statewide sustainability. Zody says running for office won't interfere with his role as the Democratic Party chair.
Already taken action on some of those things, making sure that that I, as a candidate, am not conflicted in any way with my role as chair and the authority I have there. If another candidate entered the race or something like that, we would make sure that we're impartial.
Zody's background in public service includes work under Governors Frank O'Bannon and Joe Kernan, as well as a position with President Barack Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. Now, Stoops announced earlier this month that he would retire after serving 7 years in the state Senate, but did not rule out a future run for public office. Indiana Republican Attorney General Curtis Hill, who's been accused of sexual misconduct by 5 women, is running for re-election. Now, in a video statement, Hill references his efforts to boost drug addiction treatment, lawsuits against pharmaceutical companies, and his numerous anti-abortion legal fights.
I've stood with President Trump, and I'll never back down from partisan attacks, the media, and even Republicans embarrassed to defend our values.
Republican state party leaders, including the governor, have called on Hill to resign, and he's currently facing potential disciplinary action stemming from the accusations. Hill's first hurdle is the state GOP convention, where he'll have to fight for re-nomination against at least one candidate. And that's followed by a general election race where Democratic State Senator Karen Talian has declared her candidacy. Indiana University student government held a panel this week to address concerns about safety and the IU notification systems. IU did not send out an alert last month when there was a shooting at a house party on South Grant Street. Student body president Isabel Mishkin says the panel was meant to give students a voice.
In the next few months, I hope to have more really productive conversations with different administrators, with different offices and departments, so that they're on the same page with students about what we're hoping to see.
IU officials say they didn't know about it until the suspects were already in custody, so school officials determined the situation wasn't considered an ongoing threat. Well, the Bloomington City Council adopted amendments to the proposed Unified Development Ordinance this week. The central issue at the meetings has been whether multifamily units like duplexes and triplexes will be allowed in old core neighborhoods. In a battle that's divided residents and council members, some say they would bring in more student developments. Others say they are a vital tool to produce more housing diversity.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in Congress, in the U.S. Congress, because compromise has become a dirty word.
The council voted to prohibit plexes on properties that currently hold R2 or R3 designation. That would prevent the development of new plexes in core neighborhoods. The amendment passed 6-2. Now, 2 of the 4 possible UDO meetings were held this week, with the council working through only a handful of the proposed amendments. They'll meet next Tuesday at City Hall to continue discussing the amendments. Vigo County voters passed a referendum last week to bring a casino to the area. Terre Haute Mayor Duke Bennett says casino operators have until the start of next month to submit proposals to the Gaming Commission.
And then make a decision hopefully in January or February. That's kind of what we're told. It'll be the first part of the year. Then once that's awarded, then I would think construction would start pretty quickly.
Bennett says the operator will ultimately decide the location for the casino. He says one possible site on the city's east side is an ideal location for the casino because it's next to the freeway and surrounded by a large retail area. Well, more Hoosiers approve of President Donald Trump's job performance than disapprove, according to the latest edition of Ball State's Hoosier Survey. President Trump came out ahead in the poll of 600 Hoosier adults, better than results in many other states and nationally. The numbers are a lot closer on the impeachment inquiry against Trump. More people polled say they disapprove of it, but it's within the margin of error. Trump won in Indiana in 2016 by 19 points. The Friends of Lake Monroe group is asking the public for help protecting the lake. The group teamed up with the League of Women Voters for the first of 2 meetings seeking input on a watershed management plan. Now, according to the Federal Clean Water Act, Lake Monroe is listed as impaired due to algae and mercury pollution.
We want to make sure that we don't get into some of the situations that we've seen in other places where they've let the algae and other problems get out of control.
Participants at the meeting came up with suggestions on what they would like to see in the watershed management plan. The group is hoping to have a watershed coordinator in place by next month to help develop the plan. Another public meeting will take place next month at the Brown County Library. Well, every city in Indiana can now see how climate change will affect them in the future and what they can do to prepare. As Rebecca Thiel reports, Indiana University researchers unveiled a tool this week called the Hoosier Resilience Index.
The tool allows cities to see things like how many days of extreme heat or heavy rain they can expect by 2050. It also shows what parts of the city are vulnerable to climate change, like areas in floodplains. Andrea Webster helped develop the index for the IU Environmental Resilience Institute. She says people often talk about climate change on a larger scale, but the tool she helped create shows communities how it will affect them specifically.
An individual resident and an individual mayor or county commissioner or local government official can understand exactly how climate change is going to impact them in their community.
And she says the Resilience Index is a way for folks at the local level to identify problems they can tackle.
And it's hard to know where to start. And by providing communities with a list of specific actions, they can understand, they can start to evaluate which of those actions that they are ready to take now, and maybe which of those actions they need to take in 3 years, or which they need to take in 5 years.
Webster says some of these climate solutions are simpler and cheaper than you might think. For example, more street sweeping can clear away leaves and debris that clog storm drains and cause areas to flood. 2 municipalities in the state have already tested the tool. An official from Noble County says when it comes to things like flooding and extreme heat, the county doesn't want to have to rely on federal and state relief. Webster says having a tool like this is important to all of the communities in the state. And she says just because we aren't on a coast doesn't mean we won't be affected.
But it's very much true that climate change is going to impact the state of Indiana.
Webster hopes the tool will give communities the information they need to tackle the problem head on. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Rebecca Thiel.
Bloomington officials say they'll hold a deer call at Griffey Lake Nature Preserve over the next 3 weekends. They say the call is important to the overall health of the preserve. City officials signed a contract with deer management company White Buffalo Incorporated. Unlike last year's call, White Buffalo isn't bringing its own sharpshooters. Instead, they'll use trained and screened local hunters. The preserve will be closed over the next 3 weekends for the hunt. More than 60 school districts across the state are canceling class next week as they prepare for thousands of teachers to flock to the State House. According to the state's Teachers Association, more than 8,000 participants had registered for the rally as of Friday afternoon. It's not the first major rally for teachers at the State House this year. Teachers' efforts to draw more attention to school funding and the needs of classrooms have been ongoing, with the State House rally in March and other Red for Ed events in local communities. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Older farm equipment can lack some of the safety features found in newer machines, but that new equipment can be extremely expensive, driving small farmers to choose older and less safe equipment. And as city leaders debate the future face of Bloomington, we look at how student housing has changed over the years. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
The WTIU-WFYI News Team connects Indiana to the world. We bring you the top news of the day on radio, TV, and online. We round up the stories that have people talking each week and dig deep into the issues that affect your community the most. The WTIU-WFYI News Team is where you are and telling your story.
In a time of change, where can you find in-depth reporting and thoughtful analysis? Washington Week on PBS. Join moderator Robert Costa.
When I was at the Capitol this week, I encountered the same.
And a panel of award-winning journalists.
You're seeing a divided nation, and you're seeing.
For insights and perspective.
Tonight there was a key development in the
Senate. You won't find anywhere else.
What a week.
Washington Week.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Well, the Indiana Research Center predicts Bloomington will be the 4th fastest growing metro area in the state by the middle of the century. City Limits reporter Mitch Legan discusses one of the ways Bloomington is dealing with that projected population growth: student housing complexes.
Kevin Burdishaw has lived in Bloomington for 50 years, and he's seen the city change a lot. And he isn't loving what he's seeing.
Like a lot of people I know, and a lot of lifelong residents I know, we're concerned about the concentration of population in downtown Bloomington, particularly in these big boxy apartment buildings.
Burdishaw says he misses the days when buildings throughout Bloomington had character similar to Harmony School, where he volunteers, and has become troubled about the city's decisions to tear down old structures in favor of big boxy apartment buildings.
A big shoebox is fine with a nice false front with different kind of patterns on it, but they all start looking kind of generic after a while.
He asked City Limits to look into the issue. Where did these large student complexes come from, and what is the city hoping to accomplish with them? According to census estimates, there are almost 85,000 people living in Bloomington now. Almost half those people are students, and they need places to stay. That's why we've seen an increase in multifamily housing since 2015, according to a recent study by the Regional Opportunity Initiatives, a group that studies prosperity in 11 counties in south central Indiana. According to ROI's recent housing study, Bloomington has added almost 1,300 multifamily housing units since 2015. And most of those multifamily units are occupied by students. When you compare that to the 150 or so single-family units that have been completed over the same time, it's clear there has been an explosion in student housing recently. Bloomington officials say the growth started in 1995, when the city approved a new zoning code to reinvigorate downtown.
We had what's called a downtown development opportunity overlay, which gave for increased density within certain areas surrounding the downtown, so that we could get people down there, get businesses activated.
But as buildings were going up in Bloomington, the Twin Towers came down in New York City. Grulich theorizes that 9/11 might have actually pushed students from large coastal cities toward Bloomington and the Midwest, which parents thought would be safer from possible follow-up attacks.
These out-of-state students oftentimes had a little bit more money to spend on housing. They were used to higher housing costs. So developers were quickly realizing that they could build apartments, kind of high-end, top-end stuff, and they get a lot of return on their investment.
While out-of-state enrollment was already increasing in the late 90s, IU Bloomington added just over 1,000 out-of-state students in the 2 years following 9/11. Since then, IU has added about 360 out-of-state students each year. Grulich says developers just went where the money was, and the money's in high-end student developments. While that may be good for developers, Burdishaw wants to know, how does that help Bloomington's full-time residents?
Getting renters out of the core neighborhoods. So that reduces impacts to people that are living in those neighborhoods, and it frees up some of those housing opportunities for residents to move into what was formerly a student rental house.
Only time will determine whether or not that plan is effective. But Grulich says odds are downtown Bloomington will continue changing as its population continues to grow.
Bloomington has had a positive population growth for decades, and we're going to probably continue to do that. Certainly as a result of IU, but also Bloomington is an amazing place to be. Population influx leads to growth. You have to provide housing for these folks.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Mitch Legan.
As part of our City Limits series, we answer the questions you want to know about the past, present, and future of the Bloomington community. You can join the conversation and submit your questions by going to indianapublicmedia.org/citylimits. Harvest time has farmers worried about more than just their crops. Reporter Brock Turner has more on a troubling trend developing among farmers in Indiana.
Adam Kuntz remembers the day he lost his father. He has a hard time believing it was 4 years ago.
I heard the sirens, and Mom called me frantically screaming about Dad needs help. So I jumped down from the deer stand and jumped on the four-wheeler and shot up there, and I seen the scene. And there was just one skid mark from the left side of the tractor tire going down the hill, and that's it. And then it swung over, and then it flipped over on top of him.
Kuntz says economics forced his family out of farming for a few years, but the pair planned to get back into the fields in the spring of 2015. Adam's father, Charles, was taking the tractor for a drive that October.
When he had to quit farming, it was a downer, you could see it. You'd see it in him, that it tore him up to have to quit.
Kuntz farms about 300 acres. It's a smaller operation compared to other Indiana farms. That makes it hard for him to afford new equipment and the advances in technology that comes with it. Bill Field is an extension specialist at Purdue University. He's been studying farm fatalities in Indiana for decades and says the situation Kuntz faces is a growing trend.
One of the groups that's growing rather quickly in the state are small hobby farmers or avocational farmers, people that are doing it because they like it. And these farmers tend to go out and buy used equipment. And so if we look at the data, about a quarter of all of our fatalities in the state are part-time farmers.
Field says a tractor is one of the most significant investments a farmer will make.
Not all of us can afford them $250,000 tractors and combines, which is what it's up to now. And yeah, we just repair and keep everything we got going. Especially, me, there's no way. It's just not in the budget.
Well, it's the second biggest investment a farmer makes beyond land, is to replace, maintain that equipment. And so that's an area that they can look at for savings. If they can run things a little bit longer, or if they can let parts go a little bit longer, or belts go a little bit longer. But then eventually, if they do fail in the field, that's when they become frustrating, and that's when we see people being injured.
But here in Indiana and most other states, there isn't an accident reporting requirement for farmers with fewer than 11 employees. And even in larger operations, family members are exempt. While Field says regulation can be expensive and burdensome, he admits there are holes in his data. He looks at death certificates, media reports, and a number of other sources to compile the study. He says the numbers are likely even higher.
If you're bit by a dog in the state of Indiana, that attending physician by law is required to report that to the Board of Health. You can lose your arm in a power takeoff accident on a farm, and that's not a reportable incident.
Field says there's a charm in driving an old tractor, much like driving an antique car. And that's certainly something Charles Kuntz could relate to.
How are you going to remember your dad?
Probably sitting on that tractor, honestly. That was his pride and joy, honestly. He was always on that. He took care of it, and actually it's on his gravestone too. We put a picture of him. That was him sitting on that tractor. It's hard to tell me how many hours he spent on that tractor, honestly. Every spring, fall, in between, So yeah, that's just how I picture him.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Brock Turner.
Since the study began, tractor rollover accidents have accounted for the single largest category of all farm-related deaths. Well, the Hoosier football team is ranked 24th in the AP poll and 25th in the Amway USA Today coaches poll, the first time since 1994. The Hoosiers found their name among the nation's elite after a victory over the Northwestern Wildcats. The win ushered in a 7-2 start for the season, their best since 1993 and the first winning season since 2007. The team became bowl eligible after its 6th regular season win over Nebraska. But the Hoosiers have a tough task Saturday. They face the 11th ranked Penn State Nittany Lions. Kickoff is set for noon. And that's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIU-News.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.